Luneth Station was a bustling trade hub where thousands of ships docked each day, and beings from every corner of the galaxy mixed together in crowded marketplaces and repair facilities. The Steadfast limped into port with hull damage from the asteroid field and engines running on backup power. G1 estimated repairs would take at least a week while the ship was being fixed. Word began to spread through the station about what had happened. A human freighter captain had defied a Craxian slaver over a Volani girl. He had risked his ship and his crew and his life for someone he had no obligation to protect. The reactions varied depending on who heard the story. Some thought Do-hyun was a fool who had endangered everything for sentimental nonsense. Others saw something different, something that reminded them of values they had forgotten existed in the harsh reality of space. Sayeth noticed the attention when she walked through the station with Sarah to gather medical supplies. Alien eyes followed her with curiosity rather than the predatory hunger she was accustomed to. A few beings even nodded respectfully as she passed. "They know who you are," Sarah observed. "They know what your captain did," Sayeth corrected. "Our captain," Sarah said gently. "And he did it for you, which makes you part of the story." Sayeth was still processing that idea when an unexpected message arrived at the ship. A Volani female named Talith had contacted them through a secure channel requesting a meeting. Do-hyun brought Sayeth to the station's public garden where the meeting was arranged. They found an elderly Volani woman waiting on a bench beneath artificial trees that simulated the forests of a dozen different worlds. Her skin glowed with steady blue light, and her dark eyes held decades of wisdom and sorrow. "You are Sayeth," Talith said as she rose to greet them. "How do you know my name?" Sayeth asked. "I have been searching for lost Volani for 30 years, Talith explained. "Our people are scattered across the galaxy, many enslaved, many hiding, many dead. But some of us found each other and built a community in the outer regions." She reached out and took Sayeth's hands in her own. "I heard what this human did for you, and I came as quickly as I could." Sayeth felt tears forming in her eyes. "I thought I was alone." She whispered. "You were never alone," Talith assured her. "We are few, but we survive and we remember what we were before the war." She looked at Do-hyun with gratitude that transcended words. "Thank you for protecting one of our children," she said. "You have done more for our people than you can possibly understand." "I did what anyone should have done," Do-hyun replied. Talith shook her head slowly. "You did what almost no one does, and that is exactly what makes it matter." She turned back to Sayeth. "Our community would welcome you. We have a small settlement where you could live among your own kind and learn the traditions and history that were stolen from you." Sayeth felt her heart torn in two directions. She had dreamed of finding other Volani, of rediscovering the culture and heritage that had been stripped away when she was a child. But she had also found something unexpected aboard the Steadfast. "Can I have time to decide?" she asked. "Of course," Talith said. "This is not a decision to make quickly." She pressed a data chip into Sayeth's palm. "Our location and contact information. Whenever you are ready, we will be waiting." After Talith departed, Sayeth and Do-hyun walked back toward the docking bay in silence. "You should go with her," Do-hyun finally said. "You deserve to know your own people." Sayeth stopped walking and turned to face him. "Is that what you want?" she asked. "For me to leave?" Do-hyun's expression was complicated, a mixture of emotions he rarely allowed anyone to see. "What I want does not matter," he said. "This is your choice and your life, and I will support whatever decision you make." Before Sayeth could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the station. Vorath had returned. His ship had been repaired enough to travel, and he had brought reinforcements. 3 additional vessels crewed by mercenaries and slavers who wanted a piece of the bounty. "All ships prepare for lockdown," the station's automated announcement declared. "Hostile vessels approaching." Do-hyun grabbed Sayeth's arm and they ran toward the Steadfast. When they reached the docking bay, they found Ji-won Minjae and Sarah already preparing the ship for emergency departure. Engines are only at 60%. Ji-won reported. We cannot outrun them this time. Do-hyun's jaw tightened. They were trapped. Vorath's voice came over the station's public communication system. I know the human is here, he announced. Surrender the Villani and I will leave peacefully. Refuse, and I will tear this station apart until I find her. Saith felt the old fear rising inside her, the instinct to make herself small and compliant and accept whatever fate awaited. But something else rose alongside that fear-anger. She was tired of being hunted. She was tired of being treated like merchandise. She was tired of running. I will not let him have me, she said quietly, and I will not let him hurt you, saith. Do-hyun started. You taught me that I am worth fighting for, she interrupted. Now let me prove that I believe it. Before Do-hyun could stop her, she activated the station's communication system, Vorath. She announced in a clear voice that carried across the entire station. My name is Saith of the Villani. I am not property to be bought and sold. I am not merchandise to be recovered. I am a person with the right to choose my own life, and I choose to stand with the humans who showed me what freedom means. Her words echoed through the corridors and docking bays of Luneth Station. And something remarkable happened. Other ships began powering up their systems. A human cargo vessel positioned itself between the station and Vorath's fleet, an alien trader with connections to Talith's community moved to join them. Independent captains who had heard the story of Do-hyun's defiance and been inspired by it now rose to add their voices to the stand. Within minutes, a makeshift fleet of 15 ships faced Vorath's 4 vessels. You would all die for one slave? Vorath demanded with disbelief. Do-hyun stepped up beside Saith and keyed the communication system. She is not a slave, he said. And yes, we would. Vorath looked at the assembled ships and calculated the odds. He was a predator who understood when prey had become too dangerous to pursue. This is not over, he snarled. Then his fleet turned and retreated into the darkness of space. The station erupted in celebration. Strangers embraced and cheered and raised glasses in honor of the unlikely victory. Saith stood in the middle of it all with her skin glowing brighter than it ever had. Surrounded by humans and aliens who had proven that compassion could triumph over cruelty. Later that night she found Do-hyun in the observation lounge, staring out at the stars. I have made my decision, she said. He turned to face her with acceptance. Already in his eyes, I will stay with the steadfast, she announced. This ship is my home, and this crew is my family. Do-hyun's stoic expression cracked into a genuine smile. But, she continued, I also want to help Talith find other Villani like me, to serve as a bridge between my people and this crew. We can do that. Do-hyun agreed. We can make supply runs to the Villani settlement and help with rescue operations. Saith moved to stand beside him at the window. Her reflection glowed blue against the glass, healthy and strong for the first time in years. You saved my life, she said softly. No, Do-hyun replied. I just gave you the chance to save yourself. Everything you have become was already inside you, waiting for someone to see it. Saith considered his words. Perhaps he was right. Perhaps the strength she had discovered was not new, but simply recovered from a place where years of abuse had buried it. Thank you, she said, for seeing me when no one else did. Do-hyun placed his hand on her shoulder the same way he had before the battle. Welcome to the family, he said simply. The steadfast departed Luneth Station the next morning with a crew of 5 instead of 4. Saith took her place in the cockpit beside Minjae and watched the stars stretch into lines as they jumped to hyperspace. She did not know what adventures awaited or what challenges they would face, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty: she was free, she was home, and she would never be anyone's property again. The galaxy was vast and often cruel, but it also contained humans who would risk everything for a stranger. and aliens who would rise to stand beside them. Perhaps that was the lesson the universe needed to learn. Compassion was not weakness, kindness was not foolishness, and even the smallest act of defiance could light a fire that spread across the stars. The face that appeared on the communication screen belonged to a Craxian with green-scaled skin marked by deep scars from countless fights. His name was Vareth, and his reputation in the outer systems was built on violence and cruelty. That made other slavers uncomfortable, human captain. Vareth growled through sharp teeth that gleamed under the harsh lighting of his bridge. You have something that belongs to my client. Dohin stood in the center of his cockpit with his crew gathered behind him and his arms crossed over his chest. I have nothing of yours, he replied calmly, the Vellani female. Vareth continued. You stole her from the auction on Varek's cradle. I purchased her legally with my own credits, Dohin corrected. There was no theft. Vareth's lips pulled back in a snarl that might have been a smile. In Craxian culture, outbidding another buyer for merchandise they clearly claimed is an act of theft, and my client has hired me to recover his property. She is not property, Diane said. She is a person, and she is under my protection. The Craxian laughed. A harsh sound like grinding metal. Protection from what? Your ship is a cargo hauler with minimal weapons, and my vessel could tear you apart in minutes. He leaned forward toward the camera. I am offering you a chance to survive this encounter. Surrender the Vellani, and I will let you go. No, Dohin said simply. Think carefully, human, Vareth warned. You would die for a creature you bought on a whim? I would die for a person who deserves to be free, Dohin answered. And my crew stands with me, Jiwan, Minjae, and Sira all nodded in agreement without hesitation. Vareth studied them through the screen with genuine confusion in his reptilian eyes. You humans make no sense, he said. Very well, you have one standard cycle to reconsider. And when that time ends, I will disable your ship and take what I came for. The transmission cut off. Silence filled the cockpit for a long moment. His ship is 3 times our size, Minjae reported while checking his sensors. Military-grade weapons and shields. We cannot fight him. Then we do not fight, Dohin said. We run. Jiwan shook his head. The Steadfast is fast for a freighter, but that is a pursuit vessel built for hunting down ships exactly like ours. Then we need to be smarter than him, Dohin replied. He pulled up a star chart on the main display and studied the surrounding systems. What about the Korath cluster? Sira suggested. The asteroid field there is notoriously unstable. Minja's eyes widened. That field has destroyed more ships than any pirate fleet. The gravitational anomalies alone make it nearly unnavigable. Nearly, Dohin emphasized. But you are the best pilot I have ever met. Captain, Minjae said slowly. I appreciate the confidence, but threading through the Korath cluster is borderline suicidal. So is surrendering Saith to that monster. Dohin countered. A soft voice came from the doorway. I will go with him. Everyone turned to see Saith standing there with her skin glowing pale blue and her hands clasped in front of her. If I surrender myself, you can escape, she continued. I am not worth your lives. Dohin walked toward her and stopped an arm's length away. Saith, he said gently. You do not get to decide what you are worth to us. But I am nothing, she protested. I am just a former slave with nowhere to go and no one waiting for me. You are crew, Dohin said firmly. And we do not abandon crew. Tears welled in Saith's large dark eyes. Why? She asked for what felt like the 100th time. Why do you keep risking everything for me? Dohin reached out and placed his hand on her shoulder. The first time he had touched her since removing the collar. Because that is what family does, he said. And whether you realize it or not, you became part of this family the moment you stepped aboard this ship. Saith had no words to respond. No one had ever called her family before. Now, Do-hyun said as he turned back to his crew. Let us figure out how to survive this. They spent the next several hours preparing G1, reinforced the hull plating, and overclocked the engines beyond their recommended limits. Sira prepared the medical bay for potential injuries and distributed emergency supplies. Throughout the ship, Minjae studied every available scan of the Korath cluster and plotted a course through the impossible maze of spinning rocks and gravitational wells. Saith helped where she could, fetching tools for G1 and organizing supplies for Sarah and watching over Minjae's shoulder as he worked. When the cycle ended, Vorath's voice came over the communication system again. Time is up, human. What is your decision? Same as before, Do-hyun replied. You are not taking her. Then you choose death. Vorath snarled. The transmission ended, and alarms immediately began blaring throughout the ship. He is powering weapons, Minjae announced. Get us to the cluster, Do-hyun ordered. Everyone strap in. The steadfast engines roared to life, and the ship lurched forward with more speed than it had ever produced before. Behind them, Vorath's pursuit vessel gave chase. The Korath cluster loomed ahead, a swirling mass of asteroids ranging from pebbles to mountains, all spinning through space in chaotic patterns that defied prediction. Entering the cluster, Minjae reported as sweat formed on his forehead. This is going to be rough. The ship plunged into the asteroid field. Immediately, the environment became a nightmare of spinning obstacles and near collisions. Minjae's hands flew across the controls with inhuman precision, weaving between rocks and using gravitational pulls to sling the ship around larger asteroids. Behind them, Vorath followed with weapons. Blazing energy blasts slammed into asteroids near the Steadfast, sending debris showering across the hull. The ship shuddered with each impact, hull integrity at 90%. G1 reported from the engine room, keep going. Do-hyun ordered. Minjae dove deeper into the cluster, where the asteroids were denser and the gravitational anomalies more severe. Vorath's larger ship struggled to fall, its bulk making it harder to navigate the tight spaces. A massive asteroid loomed directly ahead. Minjae, Do-hyun warned. I see it. The pilot replied. At the last possible moment, he rolled the yell, steadfast on its side, and shot through a gap so narrow that the hull scraped against rock on both sides. Vorath's ship tried to follow and failed. The Craxian vessel clipped the asteroid and spun out of control, crashing into another rock formation and losing most of its forward momentum. He is falling behind, Sira announced. Do not slow down, Do-hyun said. Keep pushing. For another 20 minutes, they flew through the cluster while Vorath struggled to regain control and continue pursuit. When they finally emerged from the other side, the Craxian ship was nowhere in sight. Sensors show his vessel is damaged and retreating, Minjae reported with exhausted relief. The cockpit erupted in celebration. G1 laughed and clapped. Minjae on the shoulder. Sarah sagged against the wall with tears of relief streaming down her face. Do-hyun closed his eyes and let out a breath he had been holding. For hours, Saith stood in the corner watching these humans who had risked everything for her. She had spent years believing that she did not matter, that her life was worth only what someone would pay for it at auction. But these 4 humans had proven that belief wrong. They had nearly died rather than give her up. They had treated her like family when she had forgotten what family meant. Something inside her shifted permanently in that moment. The last remnants of the slave mentality that had defined her for so long began to crumble away. She was not property. She was not merchandise. She was Saith, a Vellani woman who had survived the worst the galaxy could throw at her, and she was finally ready to start living. 6 weeks had passed since the collar came off, and Saith was slowly learning what it meant to exist without chains. The adjustment was harder than she had expected. Freedom was not a single moment of liberation. but a daily struggle against habits. Carved into her mind through years of captivity, she still flinched when someone moved too quickly near her. She still asked permission before eating or sitting or speaking. She still waited by the door of her cabin each morning, expecting someone to tell her what to do. The crew of the Steadfast responded to these behaviors with patience that continued to confuse her. Park Ji-won, the engineer, had started inviting her to the engine room to watch him work. At first, she simply sat in the corner and observed, but gradually he began explaining what he was doing. This coupling connects the fuel lines to the main reactor, he said one afternoon while pointing at a complex assembly of tubes and valves. If it fails, we drift in space until we die, so I check it every day. Can I help? Sci-Fi asked before she could stop herself. Ji-won looked at her with surprise that melted into a warm smile. Hand me that wrench, he said. It was such a small thing, a simple task that anyone could perform. But Saith felt something shift inside her chest as she placed the tool in his outstretched hand. She was useful, not as decoration or entertainment, but as a person who could contribute to something larger than herself. Cho Min-jae, the pilot, took a different approach. He made sure she was never alone during meals by showing up at her cabin door with 2 plates of food and sitting on the floor to eat with her. He talked constantly about everything and nothing, filling the silence with stories about planets he had visited and adventures he had survived, and terrible jokes that made no sense to her alien mind. Why did the star go to school? He asked one evening with obvious anticipation. Saith stared at him blankly. Because it wanted to be brighter, Min-jae announced, and then laughed at his own joke, while Saith wondered if all humans were this strange. But she found herself looking forward to his visits and the comfortable noise he brought with him. Yoon Sira monitored her physical recovery with careful attention. The medic performed regular scans to track the healing of neurological damage caused by years of wearing the compliance collar. Your nervous system is regenerating faster than I expected, Sira reported during one examination. Velani biology is remarkable. My people evolved on a world with extreme conditions, Saith said quietly. We had to be resilient to survive. It was the first time she had voluntarily shared information about herself. Sarah recognized the significance and simply nodded without making a fuss about it. Do-hyun gave her space. He did not hover or check on her constantly or demand gratitude for her freedom. He simply went about his work as captain while making clear through 100 small gestures that she was welcome aboard his ship. One evening, Saith found him alone in the observation lounge staring out at the stars. She hesitated at the doorway, uncertain if she should intrude. You can come in, he said without turning around. The view belongs to everyone. She entered and stood beside him, looking out at the endless expanse of space. Can I ask you something? She said. Anything. Where do you come from? Do-hyun was quiet for a moment. Before answering, I grew up on a colony world called New Bizen, he said. My parents died when I was young, some kind of industrial accident, and I spent my childhood in state care facilities. You were alone, Saith said. I was, he agreed. No family, no money, no one who cared whether I lived or died. But I survived, and eventually, I saved enough credits to buy a broken-down ship that I fixed up piece by piece. He gestured at the walls around them. This ship became my home, and my crew became my family. Saith considered this information carefully. You understand what it means to have nothing. I do, Do-hyun said. Maybe that is why I could not walk past that auction. Because I know what it feels like to be treated like you do not matter. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the stars drift past. My world is gone, Saith finally said. My family died in the first bombardment, and I was captured 3 days later by raiders who sold me to the first of many owners. She had never spoken these words aloud before. I was 12 years old when they put the first collar on me, she continued. I barely remember what freedom felt like before that day. Da-hyun did not offer empty comfort or meaningless words. He simply listened as she spoke. Every owner was different, but they all wanted the same thing. Saith said. They wanted a beautiful object to display and control. Something exotic and rare that would impress their friends. Her bioluminescence flickered with emotion. I learned to be invisible, to anticipate what they wanted before they asked, to never give them a reason to activate the collar. And now? Do-hyun asked gently. Saith turned to look at him with those large dark eyes that had seen too much cruelty for someone so young. Now I do not know how to be anything else. She admitted. I do not know who I am without the collar, and the chains, and the constant fear. You will figure it out, Do-hyun said. And you do not have to figure it out alone. The words wrapped around her like a warm blanket. She still did not fully understand these humans who risked everything for a stranger and asked nothing in return. But she was beginning to believe that their kindness might be real over the following days. Saith started emerging from her cabin more frequently. She helped Ji-won with engine maintenance and learned the names of every component in the propulsion system. She sat in the cockpit while Min-jae flew the ship and watched how he navigated through asteroid fields and around stellar phenomena. She read medical texts with Sarah and discovered a fascination with how different species experienced pain and healing, and she spent more evenings in the observation lounge with Do-hyun talking about everything and nothing while the stars burned outside. One night she asked him the question that had bothered her since the beginning. Why do humans help those who cannot help them back? Do-hyun thought about the question seriously before answering, I think it is because we know how fragile life is, he said. Humans evolved on a dangerous world where survival required cooperation, and somewhere along the way we learned that protecting each other was more important than protecting ourselves. That makes no logical sense. Saith observed, No, it does not. Do-hyun agreed with a small smile. Humans rarely make logical sense, but maybe that is what makes us human. Saith was still processing this philosophy when the ship's communication system crackled to life with an incoming transmission. Min-jae's voice came over the intercom with unusual tension. Captain, we have a problem. A Craxian ship just dropped out of hyperspace and they are hailing us. Do-hyun's expression hardened immediately. On my way, he said. He looked at Saith with something like apology in his eyes. Stay here, he said. I will handle this. But Saith already knew who had found them. The slaver from the auction had not forgotten his lost prize, and now he had come to claim what he believed was rightfully his. The Steadfast hummed with the steady vibration of engines, pushing through the void between stars. 3 days had passed since Kang Do-hyun brought the Villani girl aboard his ship, and in that time she had barely moved from the small cabin he gave. She sat on the bed with perfect stillness, waiting for instructions that never came, waiting for punishment that never arrived. The uncertainty was its own form of torture in the ship's common area. Do-hyun sat at a worn table with his 3 crew members gathered around him. Park Ji-won was the engineer, a stocky man in his 40s, with grease permanently embedded under his fingernails and a practical mind that questioned everything. Jo Min-jae served as pilot. Younger than the others with quick reflexes and a tendency to speak before thinking, Yoon Sarah was the medic, a calm woman with gentle hands who had treated every injury and illness the crew had suffered over the years. You spent everything, Ji-won said with his arms crossed over his chest. Every credit we had saved for emergencies. I know, Do-hyun replied. For a slave you cannot sell and cannot return. Ji-won continued. She is not a slave, Do-hyun said firmly. Not anymore. Then, what is she? Min-jae asked with genuine confusion. Do-hyun had no answer for that question. I saw her standing on that platform. He finally said, I saw them hurting her like she was nothing, and I could not walk away. Sarah had been quiet until now, but she leaned forward with concern in her eyes. What do you plan to do with her, Captain? I plan to set her free. Doyun answered. But first I need to understand what we are dealing with. He pulled up information on his datapad about the Villani species and their biology. What he read made his chest tighten with anger. The neural compliance collar was not simply a control device. It maintained a constant low-level signal that caused chronic pain throughout the wearer's nervous system. The pain was subtle enough that the wearer could function, but persistent enough that they could never forget their status when activated. For punishment, the collar amplified that pain by a factor of 100 years of wearing such a device would cause permanent neurological damage. "We need to get that thing off her neck," Sira said after reading the same information. "Can we do it safely?" Daihan asked. Sira studied the technical specifications and nodded slowly. The collar has a release mechanism, but it requires the control remote and a specific sequence of commands. And the collar has been attached so long that it has partially fused with her skin tissue, meaning removal will be painful. Dojin said, "Yes, but leaving it on will be worse in the long term." Dojin stood and picked up the control remote that the auctioneer had given him. He had not touched it since that day. The device felt heavy in his hand, like it was made of something darker than metal and plastic. "I will talk to her," he said. He walked through the corridor to the small cabin and knocked on the open door frame. The Villani girl was sitting exactly where he had last seen her 3 days ago. She had eaten the food that Sarah left outside her door, but she had not ventured beyond the threshold of the room. "May I come in?" Do-hyun asked. The question confused her again. Owners did not ask permission to enter spaces they controlled. She nodded because she did not know what else to do. Do-hyun entered and sat on the floor with his back against the wall so that he was lower than her position on the bed. Another strange choice. Owners always position themselves above their property. "I do not know your name," he said. "Will you tell me?" She had not spoken her own name in years. Some owners had given her new names, pet names, degrading names that stripped away her identity piece by piece. But her true name still lived somewhere inside her. "Saith." She whispered. "Saith," Do-hyun repeated carefully. "I am Do-hyun, and I need to tell you something important." She braced herself for the revelation of his true intentions. "That collar around your neck is hurting you," he continued. "Not just when someone activates it, but constantly. Every moment of every day." Saith knew this already. She had lived with the pain so long that she had forgotten what existence felt like without it. "I want to remove it," Do-hyun said. "But the removal process will hurt, and I will not do anything without your permission." Permission, the word echoed in her mind like something from a forgotten language. No one had ever asked for her permission regarding anything about her own body. "You are lying," she said before she could stop herself. Fear flooded through her immediately. She had spoken without authorization. She had accused her owner of deception. The punishment would be severe. But Do-hyun did not reach for the remote. He did not move toward her with violence in his eyes. He simply sat on the floor and looked at her with an expression she could not identify. "I understand why you think that," he said. "Everyone who owned you before has lied to you and hurt you and treated you like an object." He held up the control remote. "This device is the only thing keeping you under anyone's control, and I am going to destroy it after we remove the collar." "Why?" Saith asked. The question contained everything she could not understand about this situation. Why buy her only to free her? Why spend a fortune on property he would not use? Why treat her like a person when she had learned so thoroughly that she was not one? Do-hyun was quiet for a long moment. "Because when I saw you on that platform, I saw a person being treated like a thing, and humans cannot accept that without fighting against it." He paused. "At least this human cannot." Saith stared at him with her large dark eyes, searching for the lie beneath his words. She found nothing but sincerity, and it terrified her more than any threat could have. "If you remove the collar," she said slowly, "what will you want from me?" Nothing, Daoyun answered. I want nothing from you except for you to be free. And when you are ready, I will take you anywhere in the galaxy you want to go. The concept was too large to fit inside. Her mind, she had been property for so long that freedom felt like a word from a dead language. Something that existed only in stories about people who were not her. I will let you decide, Daoyun said as he stood. Whenever you are ready, tell Sira and she will help with the removal process. He left the room without another word said. Sat alone with the silence pressing against her skin. She thought about the collar wrapped around her neck like a promise of eternal servitude. She thought about the pain that had become so familiar, she barely noticed it anymore. She thought about this strange human who asked permission and sat below her and spoke to her like she mattered. 2 hours later, she walked out of the cabin for the first time. Sira was waiting in the medical bay with gentle hands and patient eyes. Daoyun stood nearby, holding the control remote. Are you sure? Sira asked. Sayith nodded. The process took almost an hour. Sira worked carefully to separate the collar from the tissue it had bonded with over the years. The pain was extraordinary, but Sayith had endured. Worse, what made her weep was not the physical sensation. It was the moment when Sira finally lifted the collar away from her neck, and the constant background pain that had defined her existence simply stopped. The relief was overwhelming. Her bioluminescence, dim for so long, suddenly flared bright blue across her skin as her body responded to the absence of suppression. She had forgotten she could glow like this. She had forgotten what her own light looked like. Sayith collapsed against the medical bed as tears streamed down her face. Sira wrapped a soft blanket around her shoulders, while Daoyun placed the collar and the control remote on the floor. Then he crushed them both under his boot until nothing remained but broken fragments of metal and plastic. You are free now, he said simply. Sayith looked up at him through her tears, with her skin glowing brighter than it had in years. Why? She asked again, because she still could not understand. Daoyun knelt beside her so their eyes were level. Because you are a person, he said, not property, and you deserve to choose your own life. Sayith had no response to that. She had no framework for processing kindness without conditions, but somewhere deep inside her chest, in the space where hope had died long ago, something small and fragile began to grow again. The space station called Verax. Cradle floated in the darkness between stars, where no government held power and no laws protected the weak. Kang Do-yoon walked through the crowded corridors with his hands in his jacket pockets and his eyes scanning every shadow. He was a human freighter captain in his mid-30s, with weathered skin from years of space travel and tired eyes that had seen too much of the galaxy's cruelty. His ship, the Steadfast, sat in Docking Bay 17, waiting for a cargo shipment that would pay enough credits to keep his small crew fed for another month. The station's upper levels were clean and bright, with expensive shops and restaurants that catered to wealthy travelers. But Daoyun had taken a wrong turn somewhere and now found himself descending into the lower levels, where the lights flickered and the air smelled of rust and desperation. He should have turned back. He knew that, but something pulled him forward through the winding passages until he heard the sound of voices echoing from a large chamber ahead. The room was filled with beings from dozens of species, sitting in curved rows of seats that faced a raised platform. A tall creature, with gray skin and multiple arms, stood at the center of the platform, speaking in a loud voice that carried across the chamber. Next item for your consideration, the auctioneer announced with obvious excitement. A rare specimen indeed. 2 guards dragged the small figure onto the platform and forced her to stand under the bright lights. Daoyun felt his stomach turn. She was young, perhaps the equivalent of a human teenager, with pale blue skin that should have glowed with natural bioluminescence, but instead appeared dull and faded. Her species had large dark eyes that reflected light like deep pools of water, and thin limbs that trembled as she stood before the crowd. A thick metal collar, wrapped around her neck with a small light blinking red on its surface. Decorative chains hung from the collar and connected to cuffs on her wrists, serving no purpose except to display her status as property, a Valani female. The auctioneer continued, one of the rarest species in the known galaxy since their homeworld was destroyed in the Kreth War. The crowd murmured with interest. Do-Yoon had heard of the Valani. Their planet had been caught between two warring empires decades ago and burned to ash in the crossfire. The survivors had scattered across the galaxy, and most had been captured and sold by opportunistic slavers who recognized their value as exotic collectibles. She has been trained for obedience and decorative display, the auctioneer said while gesturing at the girl like she was furniture. The neural compliance collar ensures complete cooperation. He pressed a button on a small remote, and the girl flinched as pain shot through her body. Her glow flickered briefly brighter before fading again. As you can see, fully functional. The bidding began. Wealthy aliens raised their hands and called out numbers while the Valani girl stood motionless on the platform with her eyes fixed on some distant point beyond the walls. She had learned not to react. She had learned that reactions only brought more pain. Do-Yoon watched from the back of the room with his fists clenched at his sides. A Caucasian slayer with scarred green skin and sharp teeth bid aggressively, clearly determined to win this prize. The price climbed higher and higher until most bidders dropped out. 50,000 credits. The Craxian called out with a confident sneer. The auctioneer looked around the room for other offers. Do-Yoon did not remember making the decision. One moment he was standing in silence, and the next moment his voice was cutting through the air. 60,000. Every head in the room turned toward the human. The Craxian's eyes narrowed with fury. 70,000. He growled. 80,000. Do-Yoon responded without hesitation. His heart was pounding because 80,000 credits was more than he had. It was more than the Steadfast was worth. It was the emergency fund he had built over 10 years of careful saving. The money meant to keep his crew alive if everything went wrong. 90,000. The Craxian snarled. Do-Yoon felt sweat forming on his forehead. He thought about his crew waiting on the ship. He thought about the logical choice, the smart choice, the choice that would not destroy everything he had built. Then he looked at the Valani girl on the platform and saw something in her eyes that made his decision for him. Not defeat, not emptiness. Somewhere deep beneath the layers of learned helplessness, there was still a spark of defiance waiting for a reason to burn 100,000 credits. Do-Yoon said in a steady voice. The room fell silent. The Craxian rose from his seat with murder in his eyes. But even his wealth had limits. He spat a curse in his native language and stormed out of the chamber, sold to the human. The auctioneer announced with obvious surprise, "Please approach the platform to collect your purchase." Do-Yoon walked forward on legs that felt numb. He had just spent everything he had on a decision that made no logical sense. The auctioneer handed him the control remote for the neural collar along with a datapad containing care instructions, written as if the girl were an exotic pet. She responds well to firm correction, the auctioneer advised, but be careful not to damage her skin as it affects the glow quality. Do-Yoon wanted to break the creature's arms. Instead, he simply nodded and turned to face the Valani girl. She stood perfectly still with her head bowed and her hands clasped in front of her. She had been sold many times before. She knew what came next. New owners always wanted to establish dominance quickly. Some used the collar immediately to demonstrate their power. Others preferred more personal methods. She waited for the pain that would define her new existence. "Can you walk?" Do-Yoon asked in a quiet voice. The question confused her. No one had ever asked what she could do. They only ever told her what she would do. She nodded without looking. "Up, good." Do-Yoon said, "Follow me." He turned and walked toward the exit without looking back. The Valani girl hesitated for just a moment before following. Her bare feet made no sound on the metal floor, as she moved 3 steps behind him, exactly as she had been trained. They walked through the winding corridors of Varax. Cradled in complete silence, Do-hyun did not speak because he had no idea what to say. He had acted on pure instinct, and now he had to figure out what came next. The girl did not speak because she had learned years ago that slaves who spoke without permission were punished when they reached docking bay 17. The Steadfast waited with its cargo ramp extended. It was not an impressive ship. The hull showed patches from countless repairs, and the engines made concerning sounds during startup, but it was home. Do-hyun walked up the ramp and into the main corridor of his ship. The Vellani girl followed with her eyes still fixed on the floor. She cataloged everything she observed. The ship was small but clean. It smelled of recycled air and engine grease, and something that might have been cooking food. These details would help her understand what kind of owner she now served. Do-hyun stopped in front of a door and opened it to reveal a small cabin with a bed and a storage compartment and a tiny window showing the stars. "Outside, this is your room," he said. "You can rest here." Then he turned and walked away, leaving her alone. The Vellani girl stood in the doorway, unable to process what had happened. No instructions, no threats, no pain. She entered the cabin slowly and sat on the edge of the bed with her chained hands in her lap. The door remained open behind her. She could see the corridor beyond, no lock, no guard. She did not understand this human at all, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty: whatever kindness he showed now would eventually reveal its true purpose. Everyone wanted something from her. She would wait, and she would watch, and she would discover what cruelty this human had planned in her experience. The ones who seemed gentle at first were often the worst of all.